Chapter 1. Echoes in the Silence. The great hall of the Silver Moon Pack smelled of old pine and rain-soaked earth. Torches sputtered in their iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that twisted like ghosts against the stone walls. Cora made herself small, a mouse hiding in a den of wolves. She pressed her back against the cold wall, trying to blend in with the gray stones, trying to become nothing. Tonight was the remembrance, a solemn night to honor the old Alpha. But the air wasn't sad. It was thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of change. It felt like holding your breath before a storm. Because the Lycan Prince was here, a new tension coiled in the room. Prince Kael stood near the head dais, separate from everyone else. He was a piece of the night sky fallen to earth, dressed in black leather that seemed to drink the torchlight. His presence was a void, a silent space in the cheerful noise of the pack. They said a curse kept his mouth shut. A witch's hex, whispered the pups she cared for, their eyes wide with scary stories. They said his silence was a punishment for a terrible crime committed by his bloodline generations ago. Cora didn't know if the tales were true, but she understood silence. Silence was her own prison, the quiet space between the words she wanted to say and the broken sounds that actually came out. Following the pack's traditions, Alpha Damien, a brute of a man who led with his fists, raised a hand. The hall quieted. "We honor the past to build the future," he boomed, his voice bouncing off the high, beamed ceiling. "Let the Pact of Ages be read, to remind us of our strength, our loyalty, our laws." A young wolf named Jonas was shoved forward, a heavy scroll pushed into his hands. He was nervous, his hands shaking. He started to read, his voice thin and reedy. He stumbled over a difficult name and a few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Alpha Damien's face darkened. With a snarl, he snatched the scroll from Jonas. "Pathetic. Is there no one here with the strength to speak our history?" His cold, hard eyes swept the hall. They passed over warriors and elders, hunters and healers. And then they stopped. On her. On Cora. A wicked smile spread across his lips. "You, the quiet one. Let's see if you have a voice tonight." Panic. A cold, slick thing. Slithered up her throat. "No, please, not me." The pack members near her shuffled away, creating a circle of empty space around her. They left her exposed, alone. It was like a nightmare she'd had 100 times. The whole world watching, waiting for her to fail. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Now!" the Alpha commanded. Legs made of trembling sticks carried her forward. The short walk to the dais felt like a mile over broken glass. Every eye was a physical weight, pushing her down, crushing her. The heavy scroll felt like a tombstone in her hands. The intricate letters blurred, swimming in her vision. She took a breath, a tiny, ragged gasp of air. She opened her mouth. We... The first word was a stone she couldn't push past her lips. It got stuck. A horrible, strangled sound, a stutter that had haunted her entire life. A snicker broke the silence. Then another. Soon, the hall was filled with it. Laughter. Not the warm, happy kind. This was sharp and cruel, 1,000 little needles pricking her skin. It washed over her in a wave, drowning her. Shame burned her cheeks hot and fierce. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Just disappear. Anything to escape this. In that moment of total soul-crushing humiliation, her gaze lifted, desperate for anything to hold on to. Her eyes flew across the hall and crashed into his. Prince Kael. He hadn't moved a muscle. He was still a statue carved from shadow and ice. But he wasn't laughing. His face was a mask of cold control, but his eyes were different. They were a strange, burning gold, like embers in the dark, and they were locked on her. He wasn't looking at her with pity, not with disgust. It was an intensity she had never seen before, a focus so sharp it felt like a touch. It was as if he could see right through her broken words, right past her burning shame, and was looking at the girl trembling inside. What did he see in the shattered pieces of her voice? The world seemed to fall away. The laughter faded to a distant buzz. There was only the silent prince and the broken girl, connected by a stare that felt more real than any word she had ever tried to speak. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, before it snapped. The Alpha ripped the scroll from her numb fingers, shoving her aside. She stumbled back, the laughter roaring back to life, but she barely heard it. The pack's mockery was nothing now. All she could feel were those golden eyes and the silent question that burned within them, a question that would follow her long into the cold, lonely night. Chapter 2. A Whisper of a Curse. The next day brought a pale, watery sun. It did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in Cora's bones. Her world was small, and she liked it that way. Her safe space was the pack nursery, a cozy den that always smelled of milk, clean straw, and puppy fur. Here, her stutter didn't matter. The pups didn't care if her words came out tangled. They just cared about the gentle way she cleaned their ears, the soft songs she hummed when they were scared, and the warmth of her arms. She was a background character in her own life, a faded shape content to live in the margins, and that was a kind of peace. Continuing her morning routine, she mashed berries and roots for the youngest litter's breakfast. Their happy yips were a balm to her bruised spirit. A little she-wolf with fur the color of honey tumbled into her lap, licking her chin. Cora smiled, a real, genuine smile. Here, she was needed. Here, she was more than just her broken voice. It was a simple existence, built on a single, desperate wish, to be invisible to everyone else. But invisibility was no longer an option. The arrival of Prince Kael a week ago had changed the pack's atmosphere. He moved through their territory like a storm cloud on the horizon, silent and heavy with unspoken power. He was a Lycan, a creature of ancient, pure bloodline, stronger and faster than any of them. His presence made the other wolves edgy, their own power feeling dull and common in comparison. They watched him from the corners of their eyes, their talk always circling back to him. "He never eats with the pack," a warrior muttered later as Cora passed the training grounds, her arms full of fresh linens. "He doesn't even sleep in the main den," another added, sharpening his claws on a whetstone. "Stays in the old Alpha's cabin at the edge of the woods, alone." The rumors about his curse had grown wilder, more fantastic. Some said that if he spoke, the person he spoke to would be struck down by lightning. Others whispered that his voice could crumble stone and wither trees, a destructive force so great that his silence was a cage to protect the world. His silence was his torment, his cage, a prison she understood all too well. While she fought to get words out, he fought to keep them in. Weren't they just two sides of the same broken coin? Later that afternoon, seeking a moment of true quiet, Cora slipped away to the stream at the edge of the territory. The water chuckled over smooth, gray stones, a peaceful, constant sound. She sat on a mossy bank, trailing her fingers in the cold current. She just wanted to forget the laughter, forget those golden eyes that saw too much. A twig snapped behind her. She shot to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. Prince Kael stood there. He had moved so quietly, so predatorily. He was even more intimidating up close, taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his dark shirt. His black hair was a little shaggy, falling over a brow that was set in a permanent, brooding line. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He just watched. Her first instinct was to run, to apologize for being in his space and flee. But she was frozen, pinned by his gaze. Those same golden eyes from last night held her captive. He took a slow step closer. He wasn't threatening, not exactly, but the sheer power rolling off him was suffocating. It was like standing next to a mountain that was about to come alive. Alpha Damien and two of his biggest guards suddenly broke through the trees. They must have been following him. "Prince Kael," Damien said, his voice a mocking drawl. "Enjoying a stroll? Or are you looking for something you lost? Perhaps your voice?" Kael's expression didn't change. He simply turned his head slowly, fixing the alpha with that unnerving, silent stare. He didn't need to speak. The air crackled with a challenge. It was the calm, absolute confidence of a true predator facing a posturing dog. Damien's bravado faltered for a second. "The council has questions for you, my prince, about your claim to this territory. They demand you speak." Kyle's jaw tightened. It was the only sign of his anger. He held Damien's gaze for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he shook his head once, a clear, defiant no. He refused to speak. He turned his back on the fuming alpha, a dismissal more insulting than any word could ever be. His eyes found Cora again for a fleeting second, and then, as silently as he arrived, he melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind a furious alpha and a girl whose heart was beating way, way too fast. He had protected his silence with a strength she could only dream of, reinforcing the mystery that clung to him like a shroud. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Stare. A few days later, the fragile piece Cora had rebuilt was torn apart. She was carrying a basket of medicinal herbs back from the healer's den when 3 she-wolves blocked her path. It was Alara and her 2 shadows, Maya and Kira. Alara had always been the cruelest, her words as sharp as her perfectly filed claws. She had a smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," Alara purred, stepping forward. "It's the little pack mouse. Did you find your voice yet? Or are you still just squeaking?" Maya and Kira giggled, a nasty, high-pitched sound. Cora's stomach twisted into a knot. She clutched the basket handle, her knuckles turning white. Her plan was always the same. Stay silent. Don't react. Make herself boring, and they would eventually leave. She dropped her gaze to the dusty ground, trying to will herself invisible again. "What's the matter?" Alara taunted, stepping closer until Cora could smell the cloying scent of nightshade flowers she always wore. "Cat got your tongue?" She mimicked a stutter, her voice a cruel caricature. Rage, hot and useless, flared in Cora's chest. It was an old, familiar burn. She hated them. She hated her own weakness. She wanted to scream, to tell them to leave her alone, to say anything that would make them stop. But the words were trapped, caught in the web of her own throat. All that came out was a frustrated little puff of air. Alara laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "See? Nothing. Just a broken toy. I don't know why the old alpha even let you stay. You're useless. A drain on pack resources." She reached out and shoved Cora hard. Cora stumbled backward, dropping the basket. The carefully gathered herbs and fragile glass vials scattered in the dirt. A tiny bottle of precious moon petal extract shattered, its silvery liquid soaking into the ground. A gasp escaped her lips. That was a week's worth of foraging, ruined. The healer would be so disappointed. "Oops," Alara said with a fake pout. "So clumsy." Tears pricked Cora's eyes, hot with shame and fury. She knelt, trying to salvage what she could, her hands trembling. This was it, her breaking point. She felt so small, so utterly helpless. And then a shadow fell over them. A sudden, complete silence descended. The taunting stopped. The giggling died. Cora looked up. Kael was there. He hadn't made a sound. He just stood there, a few feet away, a towering figure of silent fury. His golden eyes were fixed on Alara, and the playful cruelty in her face evaporated, replaced by genuine fear. He wasn't looking at her like a prince looking at a pack member. He was looking at her like a wolf looks at prey. The raw, primal power radiating from him was terrifying. It was a promise of violence held back by the thinnest thread of control. He didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any threat. It was a suffocating weight, a pressure that made the air hard to breathe. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, Alara and her friends scrambled backward, their bravado gone. "We were just talking," Alara stammered, her voice shaking. Kael's gaze was utterly unmoved. He took another step. That was all it took. The three of them turned and fled, tripping over each other in their haste to get away. Cora was left kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by her ruined herbs. She looked up at her unlikely savior, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was still staring at the spot where Alara had been, his whole body tense, coiled like a spring. Slowly, the rigid line of his shoulders softened. He turned his head and those intense golden eyes landed on her. He looked from her tear-streaked face to the mess on the ground. A flicker of something crossed his features. Was it regret? Compassion? She couldn't tell. He took a half-step toward her, his hand slightly raised as if he meant to help. His lips parted. For a breathtaking second, she thought he was going to speak. To her. The air vibrated with the possibility of it, the impossible thought that he would break his legendary silence for her. But then he stopped. His mouth closed, his jaw tightening as if in a struggle with himself. The moment passed. He lowered his hand, his expression becoming guarded and unreadable once more. With a final, lingering look that felt like it branded her skin, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods as silently as he had appeared. He left her there, kneeling in the dirt, with a shattered bottle of moon petal and a heart full of dangerous, impossible hope. Chapter 4. A Name in the Storm. The memory of Kael's stare followed her for days, a phantom touch she couldn't shake. To escape it, Cora sought refuge in the wilder parts of the territory, the places where the trees grew thick and the ground softened into marshland. The other wolves avoided the whispering bogs because it was too close to the unmarked lands where rogues were sometimes seen. But Cora found a strange comfort in the danger. The fear of a real threat was better than the familiar ache of shame. She was searching for wraith moss, a silvery plant that only grew on the north side of ancient oaks, its threads needed for a powerful healing salve. It was a good excuse to be alone. A storm was coming. The air grew thick and heavy, the sky bruising to a deep purple gray. Wind began to whip through the trees, making them groan like old men. A cold drizzle started to fall, slicking the leaves and turning the rich, dark earth to mud. She should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at her to run for the safety of the den. But the thought of returning to the pack, to the whispers and the stares, felt worse than the coming storm. Just a little longer. Continuing deeper into the woods, she found a patch of the moss, a silver filigree clinging to the bark of a massive oak. Relief washed over her. She pulled out her gathering knife and began to carefully scrape the delicate threads into her leather pouch. The wind howled now, a mournful sound. The drizzle turned into a hard, driving rain. That's when she heard it. A sound that wasn't the storm. A low, guttural growl that vibrated through the soles of her worn boots. She froze. Her head snapped up. From the swirling mists of the bog, a wolf emerged. It was not a pack wolf. This creature was a nightmare of matted fur and jutting bones, its body gaunt and twisted with starvation. Its eyes glowed with a feral, red-rimmed madness. A rogue. Saliva dripped from its yellowed fangs, its lips pulled back in a permanent snarl. It took a slow, stalking step toward her, its hungry gaze fixed on the frantic pulse beating in her throat. Terror, pure and absolute, seized her. She screamed. The sound was ripped from her lungs, a wordless shriek of a cornered animal. She scrambled backward, falling in the slick mud. The rogue lunged. A blur of black lightning exploded from the trees. It was Kael. He wasn't in his man form. He was a Lycan. A wolf, but a wolf of myth and legend. He was immense, a beast of midnight fur and muscle, bigger than any two wolves she had ever seen. He slammed into the rogue with the force of a falling mountain, a snarl tearing from his throat that sounded like the splitting of the world. The fight was not a fight. It was an execution. It was brutal, primal, and terrifyingly swift. He moved with a speed that was impossible, a blur of claws and teeth. The rogue's mad shrieks were cut short with a final, sickening crack. Silence fell, broken only by the drumming of the rain and Kael's harsh, ragged breaths. He stood over the fallen rogue, his massive form trembling with leftover adrenaline. Then, slowly, he turned. His eyes, burning gold even in the dim light, found her. He took a step toward her, and in a ripple of shadow and muscle, he shifted. He stood before her as a man again, naked to the waist, rain sluicing over the hard plains of his chest. Minor cuts crisscrossed his skin, already beginning to heal. He moved to her, his expression wild, urgent. He knelt in the mud, his hands hovering over her as if he was afraid to touch, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered, unable to process what had just happened. He had saved her. This silent, terrifying prince had just torn her nightmare apart with his bare hands. His mouth opened. He took a sharp breath, as if the act of speaking was a physical pain. She saw the struggle in his throat, the tension in his jaw. Then, the sound came. It wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, a voice like stones grinding together, rough and cracked from years of disuse. Cora. Her name. He spoke her name. The sound of it, shaped by his voice, hit her with more force than the rogue's attack. It wrapped around her, a shield against the storm, a sound in the silence. Everything she thought she knew about him, about herself, shattered in that single, impossible moment. Chapter 5. The council's demand news of the rogue attack spread through the pack faster than a forest fire. But it wasn't the news of her survival that had everyone whispering. It was the other thing, the impossible thing. The silent prince had spoken, and he had spoken her name. Suddenly, Cora was no longer invisible. She was a curiosity, a puzzle. The looks she received were no longer just pity or scorn. Now they were filled with suspicion and awe. It was 100 times worse. Because everyone was talking, it wasn't long before she was summoned. The summons came from Alpha Damien himself, delivered by a grim-faced guard who looked at her like she was some kind of witch. Her stomach plummeted. The great hall, which had been the scene of her deepest humiliation, was now to be the stage for her interrogation. The walk there was agony. Every whisper felt like a shout, every glance a physical blow. The council of elders was already assembled, seated in a semicircle around the Alpha's throne. The air was thick with tension and the smell of old grievances. Alpha Damien sat slumped in his high-backed chair, his face a thunderous mask of displeasure. He looked at her as she entered, his eyes narrowed. "Cora," he began, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "We hear you had an eventful afternoon. Tell us what happened." Her throat was dry. She swallowed, trying to find her voice. I was gathering herbs. A rogue?" "We know about the rogue," an elder named Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. "We want to know about the prince. He spoke to you. Why?" All eyes were on her, judging her, accusing her. I don't know." "You don't know?" Damien scoffed. "A man who hasn't spoken in a decade, a Lycan Prince bound by a curse, decides to break his silence for a stuttering Omega. And you don't know why? Do you take us for fools?" They thought she was lying. They thought she was part of some scheme. The panic began its familiar, cold crawl up her spine. "It was just my name." Just then, the great doors of the hall swung open. Kael entered. He moved with a quiet grace that commanded the room's attention. He ignored the gasps and the whispers, his golden eyes sweeping over the council with cold indifference before they found Cora. He saw the terror on her face, and his jaw tightened. "Prince Kael," Damien said, rising to his feet, "you have much to answer for. You trespass on our lands, you ignore our council, and you break your legendary silence for her. We demand an explanation. Speak!" Kael stood before them, a pillar of defiance. He met the Alpha's furious gaze and did not flinch. The elders leaned forward, waiting. The entire hall held its breath. Kael remained silent. The pressure was immense, a physical thing. Still, he said nothing. "Speak, curse you!" Damien roared, his face turning red with fury. or you will be condemned as a traitor to the alliance between our kinds." Kael's gaze slowly moved from Damien to the hostile faces of the elders. He looked like a king cornered by jackals. He saw no allies here. Then, his eyes moved and found Cora again, where she stood shivering by the wall. His expression softened for a fraction of a second. He held her gaze, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement that everyone in the hall could see, he gave a single, sharp nod. Not to the Alpha, not to the Council, but to her. A long silence followed. It was Lyra, the oldest of the elders, a she-wolf with eyes that had seen 100 winters, who finally understood. She rose slowly, her voice raspy with age. "He will not speak to you, Alpha," she said, her words dropping like stones into the quiet hall. "He has made his choice. He will speak, but he will only speak through her." The chaos that followed was a storm of outrage and disbelief, and at its center stood a terrified Cora, no longer just a pack mouse, but the unwilling voice of a silent prince. Chapter 6. The Language of Silence. Walking to Kael's cabin felt like walking to her own execution. The cabin was set apart from the main den, nestled under the dark boughs of ancient pine trees at the very edge of the territory. It was his space, his fortress of solitude, and she had been commanded to enter it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage. What would he want? What would he do? How could she possibly be a voice for a man who was a living legend, a creature of immense power and mystery? The door was unlatched. She pushed it open with a trembling hand and stepped inside. The cabin was nothing like she expected. There was no opulent furnishing of a prince nor the messy chaos of a brooding warrior. It was simple, clean, Spartan. A fire crackled warmly in a stone hearth, casting a gentle orange glow over a worn wooden table, a single chair, and a neatly made bed covered with a dark fur blanket. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something else, something that was uniquely him. It was a wild, clean scent, like the air after a thunderstorm. He was there, standing by the fire, watching her. He gestured for her to come in, then pointed to the chair by the hearth. It was a silent invitation. She sat down stiffly on the edge of the seat, her hands clenched in her lap. The silence in the cabin was different from the silence in the great hall. It wasn't empty or tense. It was full, peaceful. Because the quiet was so absolute, she felt a desperate need to fill it. The key council is very angry," she stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They think, I don't know what they think, that I'm a spy or that you—" She trailed off, her face burning with embarrassment at her own broken speech. She braced herself for him to wince, or to look away in frustration the way everyone else always did. He didn't. He pulled another chair from a corner and sat opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He just listened. His golden eyes were fixed on her, but it wasn't a stare. It was a look of profound, unwavering attention. He watched her struggle with the words, his expression unreadable but not unkind. It was the strangest feeling, to be seen so completely, without judgment. When her clumsy flood of words finally dried up, leaving her feeling small and foolish, he leaned a little closer. The space between them became charged, electric. He whispered. The sound was so quiet, it was barely a breath of air, a vibration she felt deep in her chest. "Are you all right?" The words were perfect, clear. The roughness was gone, replaced by a low, smooth timbre that made her shiver. It was a voice made for quiet confessions and midnight promises. She was so stunned she couldn't answer. She could only manage a small, jerky nod. He seemed to understand. A small, sad smile touched his lips for a second. Then he reached out, a slow, hesitant movement, as if he wasn't sure he should. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed against the back of her hand where it rested on her knee. A jolt. It wasn't a shock from surprise. It was a bolt of pure energy, a flash of white-hot lightning that shot up her arm and straight to her heart. It was warmth and power and a feeling of coming home. She gasped, her eyes flying wide open. She saw the same stunned surprise reflected in his golden gaze. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, but it was too late. They had both felt it. The spark, the undeniable, soul-deep flare of the mate bond. It was a truth that now lay between them, shimmering in the firelight, terrifying, impossible, and absolutely real. Chapter 7. The Sound of Seeing. Cora's life split into two. There was the world under the sun, a harsh place filled with the pack's suspicious stares and hushed whispers. In this world, she was a freak, the broken Omega who had somehow become the mouthpiece for a cursed prince. Then there was the world inside Kael's cabin, a quiet sanctuary that smelled of wood smoke and pine. In this world, under the gentle glow of the fire, she was something else entirely. She was listened to. Her duties as his translator were thankfully few. An elder would ask a question about territorial borders, and Kael would murmur a quiet, clipped answer into her ear, a private rumble only she could hear. Then she would have to face the pack and repeat his words, her own voice tripping and stumbling under their impatient glares. It was agony. But the moments in between, the long, quiet hours spent in his cabin, began to change something inside her. Because he was so silent, she found herself filling the space. At first, it was just nervous chatter. But Kael was a different kind of listener. He never interrupted. He never finished her sentences for her when she got stuck. He would simply watch her, his golden eyes attentive, his body still, and wait. He waited for her. No one had ever given her that before. The simple gift of patience. So she started to talk. She told him about the newest litter of pups, describing the one with ears too big for his head. She spoke of her mother, who she barely remembered, and the songs she used to hum. She confessed her secret dream of seeing the ocean, a place she'd only heard about in stories. The words came out haltingly, a broken stream of sounds, but he never flinched. He just took them all in. One evening, a cool breeze rustling the pines outside, she was trying to tell him about a rare moon petal flower she'd once found. Each of the pet... The word caught in her throat, a stubborn knot she couldn't untangle. Frustration burned hot behind her eyes. She snapped her mouth shut, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't," she whispered, the two words she knew best. He was sitting across the small wooden table from her. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and gently tapped the tabletop, a soft sound in the quiet room. When her gaze lifted from her lap, he touched 2 fingers to his chest. Then, he pointed to his ear. He finished the gesture with a small, encouraging nod. The meaning was as clear as a spoken sentence. "I am here. I am listening." He didn't care about the stumbles. He didn't care about the broken sounds. He just wanted to hear what she had to say. It was a kind of acceptance so profound, so absolute, that it cracked open something deep inside her. A single hot tear escaped her eye and slid down her cheek. Before she could wipe it away, he was there. He had moved so quickly, so silently. He reached out, his calloused thumb brushing the tear from her skin. The touch was a jolt of lightning. A warm, humming current that shot through her, making every nerve ending sing. It was the mate pull, stronger this time, a physical ache that demanded closeness. She stopped breathing. He froze, his thumb still resting on her cheek, his golden eyes wide with a burning intensity. The space between them was a wire pulled taut, vibrating with a silent, desperate question. Chapter 8. A breath of courage. The next day, after a tense exchange where Alpha Damien called her Kael's pet mouse, Kael's jaw set in a hard, resolute line. He led her from the cabin, not with words, but with a firm look that she was already beginning to understand. He took her deep into the forest, to a sun-dappled clearing where the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. He was going to teach her to defend herself. Power is not just strength, he murmured, his voice a low, private sound meant only for her. It is control. He moved with a fluid, deadly grace, showing her how to stand, how to shift her weight, how to block a blow. His instructions were simple, his movements precise. When she struggled to copy a stance, he would gently correct her, his hands warm on her waist, his fingers guiding her arms. Each touch was a small fire on her skin, making it impossible to focus. The air was thick with his scent, pine and wild earth and something uniquely him. It was dizzying. "You are too tense," he said softly, his eyes seeing right through her clumsy attempts. "Your fear makes you weak. It steals your breath." She knew he was right. Fear was the cage she'd lived in her whole life. "I will show you," he whispered. He stepped behind her, so close that his chest pressed against her back. He was a wall of solid warmth. She felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her spine. One of his large hands settled on her stomach, just below her ribs. The other rested gently on her shoulder. Her breath hitched. "Breathe with me," he commanded, his voice a low vibration against her ear. Slowly, in. He took a deep, controlled breath, and she felt the expansion of his chest against her. And out. He released it in a long, steady sigh. She tried to follow, but her lungs felt tight and small. His closeness was too much. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He didn't move away. He just held her there, a firm, grounding presence. He breathed in and out, a slow, powerful rhythm, until her panicked body had no choice but to start following his. Her ragged gasps softened, deepened. A strange, unfamiliar calm began to settle in her bones, a stillness she'd never known. "Good," he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. The touch was feather-light, accidental, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. "Now, tell me your name." She breathed in, deep, feeling his strength surrounding her, holding her. She felt the air fill her lungs completely. She breathed out, and the words came with it, carried on a single smooth current of air. "My name is Cora." The sentence was perfect. No stumbles, no breaks. Just her voice, clear and steady. They both froze. The sound of it hung in the sunlit clearing, a small miracle. She turned slowly in his arms, her eyes wide with a disbelief so pure it felt like joy. He was already looking down at her, his golden eyes dark and intense, swirling with an emotion that stole her breath all over again. It was pride. It was wonder. It was a hunger so profound it made her knees weak. The forest, the world, everything faded away. There was only the space between them, shrinking to nothing. He lowered his head. His lips parted slightly. This was it. The moment she had started to dream of. A piercing howl ripped through the air, coming from the direction of the den. An emergency summons. The spell shattered. Kael's head snapped up, a growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. The moment was gone, stolen from them. He stepped back, and the warmth of his body left her feeling suddenly, terribly cold. The promise of the kiss remained between them, an unspoken, aching question. Chapter 9. The Poison in the Blood. The summons was not for a rogue attack or a border dispute. It was a trap. When they reached the Great Hall, it was already filled with the entire pack, their faces tense and uneasy. Standing before the Alpha's throne was a wolf Cora had never seen before. He was tall and imposing, with a mane of silver hair and eyes as sharp and gray as flint. His presence radiated an ancient, chilling authority that made even Alpha Damien seem small. "Lord Valerius," Kael breathed next to her, the name a curse on his tongue. This was Kael's rival, a Lycan lord from the Northern Ridge, and he was here for a reckoning. "Brothers and sisters of the Silver Moon Pack," Valerius's voice boomed, filled with a charisma that was both charming and dangerous. "I have come because I fear you are in grave danger." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing, with pinpoint accuracy, on Kael. "You have given shelter to a prince, but you do not know the truth of his bloodline." A murmur of confusion went through the pack. "We are taught that the Lycan voice is a gift," Valerius continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "A tool of command of power. But Kael's ancestor, the Mad King Theron, twisted that gift. In his lust for power, he used dark magic, and it corrupted his blood, turning his alpha's roar into a weapon of pure destruction." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. That dark magic did not die with Theron. It became a curse, a poison passed down through every generation of his tainted line. Valerius's cold gray eyes now found Cora, and a cruel smile touched his lips. "The curse is simple and it is absolute. The poison is carried in his voice. Any wolf he speaks to with true emotion, anyone he dares to form a bond with, will be infected. It is a blight of the soul, a sickness that starts with weakness, progresses to madness, and ends in a slow, agonizing decay." A collective gasp went through the hall. Horrified eyes turned on Cora. She felt the blood drain from her face. A cold, terrifying dread began to creep through her veins. Was that why she felt so tired lately? Was the spark she felt not a mate bond, but the first touch of a death sentence? "His silence is not a noble sacrifice," Valerius shouted, pointing a dramatic, accusing finger at Kael. "It is a quarantine. He stays quiet not out of choice, but because he is a walking plague. He is protecting you from the poison that he is." The hall exploded into panicked shouts. Cora looked at Kael. His face was a mask of pure anguish, his body rigid. He wasn't looking at Valerius. He was looking at her. And in the depths of his tormented golden eyes, she saw the horrible, devastating truth. It was all real. His cage wasn't just to hold his voice in, it was to keep his curse from getting out. As the chaos swirled around her, a hand grabbed her arm. It was the old elder Lyra, her face etched with grim pity. "You must reject him," the old wolf whispered, her voice urgent and dry like rustling leaves. "You must do it now, child, before the bond solidifies, before the poison takes root in your soul and you are lost forever." Chapter 10. Words on Paper. The pack's fear was a sickness. After Valerius's public accusation, it clung to the air like a foul miasma, poisoning every interaction. Cora felt it in the way the other wolves now recoiled from her, their eyes wide with a new kind of horror. They didn't just see a broken Omega anymore, they saw a contamination. Lyra's warning to reject him, for her own life, played over and over in her mind, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. For a full day, she stayed away from his cabin, hiding in the nursery, her heart a tangled knot of fear and a strange, aching loyalty. The pull toward him was a physical thing, a constant hum under her skin, and by nightfall, she could resist it no longer. She needed answers more than she needed safety. She found him by the fire, a solitary figure etched in shadow and flickering light. He was staring into the flames, but his gaze was distant, lost in a place of old pain. He looked up as she entered, and the raw desolation in his eyes made her breath catch. The air in the cabin was thick with everything they couldn't say. Was it true? Are you a plague? Am I dying? The questions screamed in her mind, but she couldn't force them past her lips. As if he could hear her silent panic, he pushed a folded piece of parchment across the small wooden table. His handwriting was like him, sharp, strong, and angular, the black ink stark against the cream-colored paper. She read it, her hands trembling. He wrote not of a curse, but of a power that had been corrupted long ago, a gift of command that had been twisted by dark magic into a weapon. He told her about his younger sister, Lyanna. He'd been a boy, barely in control of his shifting, and they had argued. In a flash of childish rage, he had yelled at her, his voice imbued with the raw, untamed power of his bloodline. She had collapsed, and for weeks a mysterious sickness had wasted her away, a blight the healers couldn't explain. She recovered, but the terror of what he had done silenced him more effectively than any cage. "My silence was a vow," he wrote, "a shield to protect the people I cared for. I never intended for anyone to get close again, especially not you. You were a complication I did not plan for, and now you are a danger I cannot bear to be responsible for." Her vision blurred with tears. His silence wasn't a punishment from a witch. It was a self-imposed penance, a lonely vigil he had kept his entire life. He slid a second, smaller note toward her. The words on it were few, but they carried the weight of a breaking heart. "I will not ask you to share this burden. If you wish to leave, I will not stop you." He was giving her an escape, an act of love that was also a surrender. She looked up from the heartbreaking words and met his gaze. His face was a stoic mask, but his golden eyes were shattered, braced for the rejection he believed was inevitable. He thought she would choose safety. He thought she would run. She took a slow breath. Then, with a deliberation that felt like the most important choice of her life, she picked up the letters, held them tightly to her chest, and shook her head. A single, silent no. A flicker of disbelief, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated hope, flared in his eyes. It was so intense it was like watching the sun rise after a long night. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't dared to dream of it. She wasn't running. She was choosing him. As she carefully tucked the precious, painful letters into a hidden pocket, she felt the world shift on its axis. This was no longer just a forbidden bond. It was a shared secret, a silent rebellion. It was the two of them against everyone. Chapter 11. The Alpha's Roar. Weeks crept by, each one colder than the last. Valerius remained, a silver-tongued serpent poisoning the pack's heart, turning their fear of Kael into simmering resentment. The unity of the pack was fraying, the tension a thin wire stretched to its breaking point. In a clumsy attempt to display strength and normalcy, Alpha Damien commanded a festival for the full moon. The central clearing was filled with bonfires and the forced, hollow sound of celebration. Cora and Kael stood at the edge of the firelight, a pair of shadows observing the tense festivities. Their secret commitment was a small, warm flame between them in a world that was growing increasingly cold. The attack came without warning. A wave of dark shapes exploded from the tree line, a coordinated assault of rogue wolves, their eyes glowing with a feral hunger. But among them were others, larger and more disciplined, wearing the silver crest of Lord Valerius. It wasn't a random raid. It was a coup. Chaos erupted. The celebratory feast turned into a battlefield. Silver Moon warriors, caught by surprise, scrambled to defend their territory, but they were outmatched, outnumbered. Cora was knocked to the ground in the initial surge, the air filled with the sounds of snarling, the clang of claws on stone, and the cries of the wounded. She tried to scramble away, to find cover, but two of Valerius's wolves cornered her against a massive oak. They were huge, their lips peeled back to reveal yellowed fangs. They weren't trying to kill her. They were flanking her, cutting off her escape. "Lord Valerius wants the prince's weakness," one of them growled, his voice a low rumble. He lunged, not with his teeth, but with a heavy paw, trying to pin her. Across the clearing, Kael was a whirlwind of black fur and fury, fighting back to back with three other warriors against a tide of rogues. He saw her. He saw the wolves closing in on her. A desperate, enraged roar tore from his wolf form, but he was trapped, overwhelmed. He watched, helpless, as one of the silver-crested wolves grabbed Cora's arm, his claws digging into her skin. Something in Kael snapped. The deep, guttural growl of the wolf vanished. He threw his head back, his man form rippling beneath his shifter skin. A sound of pure, ancient power, a sound not heard in generations, ripped from his throat. It was his voice, his true voice. "She is mine!" The words were not just sound. They were a physical force of nature. A shockwave of raw, untamed energy erupted from him, a visible distortion in the air. The ground beneath his feet cracked and split. The nearest bonfire exploded in a shower of embers. The wave of power slammed into the rogues surrounding him, throwing them back like broken dolls. The two wolves holding Cora screamed, dropping her and clutching their heads, their bodies convulsing as if the sound itself were a lethal poison. A profound, stunned silence fell over the battlefield. Every wolf, silvermoon, and rogue alike stared at Kael with raw terror and awe. He stood in the center of a circle of destruction he had created with a single sentence. The curse was real. His power was devastating, and he had just irrevocably claimed his mate in front of the entire world, using the very magic that was supposed to destroy her. The game had not just changed. It had been shattered. Chapter 12. The Price of a Name. The attack was over. Valerius's forces, broken by Kael's display of power, had retreated into the darkness. But the victory felt like a defeat. The clearing was scarred, the air smelled of blood and ozone, and the pack was fractured. Their fear now solidified into a single terrifying point. Kael. They were summoned before the council almost immediately. The great hall was damaged, a long crack running across the stone floor from where Kael had stood, a stark reminder of what he had unleashed. They stood together in the center of the room, not as heroes who had saved the pack, but as defendants on trial. Lord Valerius, ever the opportunist, stood with the elders, his face a mask of grave concern. "You see now," he declared, his voice ringing with false piety. "I tried to warn you. His power is a blight, an uncontrolled weapon. His bond with this Omega will be the ruin of this pack. He cannot control it." Alpha Damien, his authority shattered and his pride wounded, was quick to agree. "He's right," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Kael. "This is a threat to us all. The bond is a contagion. It must be broken." The elders murmured their grim agreement. They looked at Cora, their eyes filled with a new, frantic urgency. She was no longer just a potential victim of the curse. She was the fuse connected to a bomb. It fell to Lyra to deliver the verdict, her old voice heavy with the weight of her duty. "The council is unanimous," she announced, her gaze fixed on Cora. "For the safety and survival of the Silvermoon Pack, the mate bond must be formally and publicly rejected. Cora, you will renounce him. Kael, you will be exiled from these lands, effective at dawn." Exiled. Renounced. The words struck Cora with the force of a physical blow. They were asking her to save herself by condemning him to a life of utter solitude, to cast him out after he had just saved them all. She looked at Kael. He stood beside her, silent and still as stone once more. He did not look at her. He could not. But she could feel his despair radiating from him like a cold aura. He was prepared for this. He had been preparing for it his entire life. Later that night, the silence in his cabin was a suffocating blanket. The council's decree hung between them, a blade poised to sever the fragile connection they had built. He stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit forest he was about to be banished from. He wouldn't ask her to defy the council. He wouldn't ask her to choose him over her pack, her safety, her life. He wouldn't even look at her because he couldn't bear to see the choice in her eyes. She walked toward him, her footsteps making no sound on the wooden floor. This was her decision, and she would make it with a voice that was finally, truly her own. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold, but his fingers instinctively laced with hers, a desperate, last grasp. He finally turned, his golden eyes a swirling vortex of pain and a single, heartbreaking question. She met his gaze without flinching. She gave him her answer, not with a stutter or a stumble, but with a fierce, trembling whisper that was more powerful than any alpha's roar. "I can't let you go." Her words were a vow, a rebellion, a promise that sealed their fate and declared war on the world that was trying to tear them apart. Chapter 13. A Kiss in the Shadows. Her whispered vow, "I can't let you go," was a spark thrown into a tinder-dry forest. It hung in the charged air of the cabin, a declaration of rebellion that defied 1,000 years of tradition and a council's decree. Kael stared at her, his face a battleground of disbelief, hope, and raw terror. He had offered her an escape, and she had refused to take it. Without a word, he grabbed her hand, his grip firm and urgent. He pulled her out of the cabin, away from the revealing glow of the fire and into the deep, concealing shadows of the ancient pines. The moon cast long, silvery fingers through the canopy, but here, pressed against the rough bark of a tree, they were invisible. He needed to be sure. He needed her to understand the full weight of her choice. "Cora," he whispered, his voice thick with a desperate, raw emotion she had never heard before. He framed her face with his large, warm hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. To choose me is to choose exile, a life of running, of hiding. To choose this poison in my blood. His thumbs traced the line of her jaw, his golden eyes boring into hers, searching for any flicker of doubt, any hint of hesitation. He was giving her one last chance to save herself. She saw the future he was offering, a cold, lonely, and dangerous path. It should have terrified her. But the thought of a future without him, a future back in the crushing silence of her own shame, was infinitely worse. Reaching up, she placed her small, trembling hands over his. "I choose you," she breathed. The words were quiet, but they were the steadiest, truest words she had ever spoken in her life. That was all it took. Her simple, absolute certainty shattered the last vestiges of his control. He crashed his mouth down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle exploration. It was a desperate, hungry claiming. The kiss was filled with all the gratitude, all the fear, all the furious, unspoken love he had held captive for a lifetime. It was a raw, primal expression of a soul that had been starving for a single drop of acceptance. She met his fervor with her own, a lifetime of being silenced and overlooked melting away in the searing heat of his touch. This was not a kiss of tender beginnings. It was a kiss of shared endings and defiant new starts, a promise sealed in the shadows. They broke apart, breathless, pressing their foreheads together as their ragged breaths mingled in the cold night air. The world had shrunk to this single point of contact, this shared, desperate reality. "They will hunt us," he murmured, his lips moving against hers. "I don't care," she whispered back, the truth of it settling deep in her bones. In that moment, they were no longer a prince and an omega. They were a single soul, a united front against the world. But they were not as alone as they believed. Deeper in the woods, a figure detached itself from the shadows of a neighboring tree. The elder Lyra had seen it all, the defiant vow, the claiming kiss. With a grim, disappointed set to her jaw, she turned and slipped silently back toward the den, carrying their rebellion like a weapon to be used against them. Chapter 14. The Allies' Betrayal. Dawn broke cold and gray, the sky the color of old iron. It was the morning of the exile. Kael was brought before the council in the great hall, his face a mask of cold, controlled dignity. He was prepared to accept his fate. What he was not prepared for was Cora walking in behind him, taking her place at his side. Her silent presence was an act of defiance so profound it sent a wave of shocked and angry murmurs through the assembled pack. Alpha Damien's face purpled with rage. "So, the mouse has found her courage," Damien sneered. "It will not save him." He stood, puffing out his chest. "Kael of the Theron line, for the crime of endangering this pack with your cursed blood, you are hereby exiled. If you ever set foot on Silvermoon lands again, it will be your last." From the side, Lord Valerius watched with a smug, victorious smile. This was everything he had hoped for. Kael gave a single, sharp nod, accepting the sentence. His only concern was for the woman who stood beside him, impossibly brave and impossibly foolish. He had to get her away from here, away from their judgment and their hatred. But just as the guards were about to lead them away, a voice stopped them. "Wait!" It was Lyra. The old elder stepped forward, her face etched not with pity, but with a cold, hard righteousness. She did not look at Kael. Her disappointed eyes were fixed solely on Cora. "I had thought you a victim in this," Lyra said, her voice ringing with the sting of betrayal. "A foolish girl caught in the web of a dangerous man." "I was wrong." Cora's blood ran cold. "I saw you last night," Lyra announced to the stunned hall. "I saw you in the shadows clinging to him. I heard you promise yourself to him, defying the direct decree of this council. This is not the loyalty of a fated mate. This is the reckless passion of a child, and you have chosen his curse over your own pack." The words were a dagger, twisted in Cora's back by the one person she thought might understand. Lyra's version of the events painted Cora not as a brave woman making a stand, but as a traitorous conspirator. The last remnants of sympathy the pack might have held for her evaporated like morning mist, replaced by open scorn and disgust. She was no longer just the prince's weakness. She was a willing accomplice to his crime. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in Kael's chest. He pulled Cora behind him, shielding her small frame with his body in a gesture of pure predatory possession. His quiet acceptance of exile was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly fury. "You will not have her," he whispered, but the words carried the lethal weight of a death sentence. He looked at Damien, at Valerius, at the hostile faces surrounding them. His golden eyes blazed with a new promise, one directed not at the council but at her. "They will never take you from me." Their exile had just become a desperate escape. Chapter 15, An Oath of Blood. The escort to the border was a grim, silent procession. 2 of Damien's hulking guards in the front, and 2 of Valerius's silver-crested wolves behind them. The air was thick with unspoken menace. This wasn't an escort. It was a death march. They were being led away from the familiar forest paths, down into a rocky, shadowed ravine where the trees grew sparse and the ground was littered with sharp, broken stones. There would be no witnesses here. Kael sensed the shift a second before it happened, the subtle change in the guards' posture, the way their hands drifted toward the silver daggers at their belts. He stopped, grabbing Cora's arm. "Run," he mouthed, his eyes wide with urgency. The word was barely formed before the trap was sprung. The guards lunged. Kael shoved Cora behind him, meeting their charge with a roar of pure fury. He was a whirlwind of motion, a Lycan fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal protecting his mate. But they were prepared. They weren't trying to kill him outright. They were using heavy, silver-laced chains, trying to entangle him, to weaken him, to drag him down. While Kael was occupied with 3 of them, the 4th, the largest of Valerius's assassins, broke away, his eyes fixed on a different target. He lunged past Kael, raising a wicked, curved silver dagger high. He wasn't aiming for the Lycan Prince. He was aiming for the prince's only weakness. Kael saw it. He roared her name, a sound of pure terror, but he was tangled in the heavy, burning chains. He couldn't reach her. Cora saw the assassin's eyes, saw the silver blade begin its descent. There was no time to think, no time for fear. There was only Kael, his face a mask of horror, and the certain knowledge that she would not let this man be hurt because of her. With a cry, she threw herself in front of Kael. Pain, blinding and white-hot, exploded in her shoulder as the dagger sliced deep. The force of the blow threw her against Kael's legs, a strangled gasp tearing from her throat. The sight of her falling, of her blood staining the dark earth, shattered whatever control Kael had left. A true alpha's roar, a sound of absolute grief and rage erupted from him. The sound wave was a physical blow, snapping the silver chains as if they were thread. He moved faster than a blinking eye. The assassins had no time to scream. Then he was on the ground, gathering her into his arms. "Cora!" he choked out, the name a broken, ragged thing. He pulled the dagger from her shoulder, his hands gentle, his face a mask of agonizing terror. The wound was deep, and the edges were already turning black from the silver's poison. They were too far from the den. There were no healers, no time. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. He looked into her eyes, and she saw his decision. She gave a weak nod. Without hesitation, he bit down hard on his own wrist, tearing the skin. Dark, rich blood, his life force, his power, his curse, welled up. He pressed the bleeding wound to her lips. "Drink," he commanded, his voice a plea. It was an ancient, forbidden act, a blood oath, a mingling of souls. Hesitantly, she did as he asked. His blood was hot and electric on her tongue, a jolt of pure energy that tasted of lightning and the deep forest. As it entered her system, she felt not a sickness, but a surge of wild, untamed power. She felt him. In that moment, kneeling in a ravine surrounded by their fallen enemies, their lives, their souls, and their fates became irrevocably, terrifyingly one. Chapter 16. The Liar's Rejection. The cave was a cold, damp womb, a temporary shield against the hostile world. Cora drifted on a painful tide of fever, the silver poison from the assassin's dagger a fire in her veins. Kael's blood oath, his desperate act of shared life, battled against it, keeping the darkness at bay but not conquering it. Through the haze of her sickness, she was aware of his constant presence. He was a warm, solid anchor in the terrifying storm, his hands gentle as he bathed her brow with cool water, his silent vigil a testament to the vow he'd made. He was her guardian, her mate, her only hope. But their sanctuary was fragile. It was shattered by the sudden, violent intrusion of light and sound. Lord Valerius and Alpha Damien stood at the mouth of the cave, flanked by their most formidable warriors. They had been tracked. There was no escape. A weary Kael rose to meet them, placing himself between Cora and the intruders. But he was drained from the fight, from sharing his life force with her. They overwhelmed him easily, binding him in heavy, reinforced silver chains that hissed against his skin and visibly sapped his remaining strength. He didn't fight them. His only concern was for her, his golden eyes filled with a desperate, protective fury. Valerius stepped past the chained prince, his cold gaze falling on Cora's pale, sweating form. A cruel, triumphant smirk played on his lips. "Look at her, Kael. The silver does its work. Such a pity." He produced a small, crystalline vial from within his coat. A soft, pearlescent liquid swirled within it, glowing with a faint light. "Fortunately for her, we have the antidote. A mercy, for a price." Damien shouldered his way forward, his face a mask of brutish satisfaction. He laid out their terms, his voice a low, vicious snarl. "The girl rejects you. Here. Now. She will renounce the bond, sever the tie, and swear she wants no part of you." Kael strained against his chains, a low growl of pure hatred rumbling in his chest. "Never." "If she does as she's told," Damien continued, ignoring him, "she gets the cure. We will let her live out her pathetic life. If she refuses, we will sit here and watch the poison finish its work. And then, Kael, when she is gone, we will take our time finishing you." It was an impossible, perfect trap. They were using her life to control him, and his life to control her. "No, Cora, don't," Kael started, his voice a raw plea. But she silenced him with a look. She saw the cold, absolute certainty in Valerius's eyes. This was not a bluff. They would do it. They would watch her die just to break him. To save his life, she had to destroy everything they had built. She had to become a liar. Pushing herself up on one trembling arm, she met Kael's terrified gaze. Her own heart felt like it was cracking into 1,000 tiny pieces. "I will do it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash and poison on her tongue. The look of raw, uncomprehending betrayal that flashed across Kael's face was a wound far deeper than any silver blade. Chapter 17, A Prison of Silence. The rejection was a hollow, soulless performance. Propped up by 2 guards, Cora recited the words Damien fed her. I renounce the bond. I reject Kael of the Theron line. I want no part of him. Each word was a betrayal, a lie that tore another piece from her soul. She couldn't look at him, but she could feel his stillness, feel the moment the last flicker of hope died within him. When it was done, they shoved the vial of antidote into her hand and dragged Kael away. His eyes met hers one final time as they hauled him from the cave. The burning gold she had come to love was gone, replaced by a vast, empty coldness. It was the look of a man whose world had just ended. He believed her. He believed she had chosen a cure over him, survival over their shared soul. The journey back to the den was a blur of misery. The antidote worked quickly, breaking the physical fever, but a deeper, more profound sickness took its place. Lyra met her at the entrance to the healer's den, her ancient face an unreadable mask of stone. Cora was now a prisoner in all but name, confined to a small cot, her every move watched. The other wolves who brought her food and water would not meet her eyes. They saw her as a traitor who had saved her own skin, the Omega who had been given a prince's heart and had thrown it away. She tried to ask about Kael, to find out where they had taken him, but the words wouldn't come. Grief and shame had stolen her voice again, pulling her back into a silence more complete and suffocating than any stutter. She was the quiet one again, the broken thing. Had she just been playing a part? Had she ever really been brave? The doubt was a venom, spreading through her, far more potent than the silver had been. In a cold, lightless cell carved from the rock beneath the great hall, Kael had retreated into a tomb of his own making. The fight had gone out of him. The Lycan's fire was extinguished, leaving only cold ash. Her rejection was the final proof of the one fear that had haunted his entire life. He was unlovable. The curse made him a monster, and monsters were always, eventually, abandoned. He didn't rage. He didn't test the bars. He simply sat on the cold stone floor, a hollowed-out king, and let the silence swallow him whole. Back in the healer's den, Cora finally succumbed to the crushing weight of her despair. She curled into a tight ball, her body aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical death. She had lost him. And in doing so, she had lost the fierce, unbroken girl she had only just begun to discover within herself. The silence she had once craved now screamed with his name. Chapter 18. The Final Twist of the Knife. She was recovering, her body at least. Her spirit felt like a shattered ruin, but the poison was gone. A few days after her return, Lord Valerius came to visit. He entered the healer's den with the proprietary air of a man who had won a great victory, a smug, cruel smile playing on his lips. He dismissed the healer with a wave of his hand, leaving them alone. "I came to see how our little survivor is faring," he said, his voice a low, mocking purr. He circled her cot like a vulture, his flint-gray eyes glinting with amusement. "You played your part beautifully, you know. Such a tragic choice. So very noble. Sacrificing your precious bond to save your prince's life." Cora turned her face away, refusing to look at him, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, you must feel very heroic. You looked him in the eye and lied to save him. But my dear, naive little Omega, you didn't save him. Did you truly believe a curse that has held a royal bloodline captive for centuries could be sidestepped so easily?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous, triumphant whisper that was meant only for her. The Theron curse isn't just a poison passed through his voice. It is a lock, a metaphysical chain binding the true, devastating power of the Lycan Alpha. For generations, it has been waiting for the key. The world around Cora seemed to tilt and fade. "That key," Valerius continued, savoring each word, "is the absolute, unconditional, and public acceptance of a true mate. A formal claiming that would shatter the ancient magic forever." He paused, letting the horror of his words sink in. "Your rejection," he purred, his smile widening as he saw the dawning comprehension in her eyes. "Your public renunciation was the exact opposite. It was the ultimate act of non-acceptance. You didn't just fail to break the curse, you turned the key in the lock. You have bound it to his soul so tightly that it can never be broken. He is weaker now than he has ever been. You did not free him. You sealed his tomb. The truth was a physical blow. It knocked the air from her lungs, the light from her world, her sacrifice, her impossible choice, her heartbreak. It was all for nothing. Worse than nothing. Her one desperate act to save him had been the very thing that had irrevocably doomed him. Her greatest fear, the one that had haunted every stuttered word of her life, that her weakness would destroy everything she loved, had just come true in the most monstrous way imaginable. Despair, absolute and bottomless, opened up beneath her, and she fell. But as she fell into that dark, silent abyss, something new ignited in the wreckage of her heart. It was not hope. It was not courage. It was pure, unadulterated rage. And from that rage, a single silent thought took root. Fight for him. Chapter 19. The Elder's truth rage was a fire. It burned away the last remnants of Cora's despair, leaving behind a core of cold, hard clarity. She was not a victim. She was a weapon that Valerius had used against the man she loved, and her grief had now been forged into a blade of pure purpose. In the dead of night, while the pack slept a troubled sleep, she slipped from the healer's den. She was a ghost in the moonlight, her bare feet making no sound on the cool earth. She had one destination. Lyra's den was at the base of the oldest oak in the territory, filled with the dry, papery scent of ancient scrolls and herbs. The old she-wolf was awake, sitting by a single candle, as if she had been waiting. Cora did not enter as a supplicant. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette of defiance, and the words she spoke were not a plea, but an accusation. You told me to reject him, she said. The stutter was there, a familiar ghost, but the voice carrying it was new. It was hard, unforgiving. You said it would save him. Lyra's stern, wrinkled face seemed to crumble under the weight of her gaze. The elder looked down at her gnarled hands, the fire of righteousness in her eyes finally extinguished, leaving only the gray ash of regret. I thought I was protecting you, child, protecting the pack. The curse is an old, fearsome story. It was a lie, Cora cut in, taking a step into the den. Valerius's lie, and you helped him. The lie was Valerius's, Lyra confessed, her voice a ragged whisper. But the fear was mine. I let it blind me. To prove the truth of her regret, to show Cora the nature of the man she had condemned, she rose and unsealed a heavy leather-bound scroll from a locked chest. The private records of the Theron line. She told Cora the full story. The one Kael had been unable to write in his letter. The story of his younger sister, Lyanna, frail from birth. She told of a childish argument, a flash of uncontrolled pre-shifter rage, and a single shouted word from a young Kael that had nearly stopped his sister's heart. He had watched her sicken, watched the healers fail, and had sworn a vow on his own life that he would never again speak a word with intent, for fear the power in his blood would harm someone he loved. His silence wasn't a curse from a witch. It was a self-imposed prison built to protect one person, a penance he had paid every day of his life. The knowledge settled in Cora's soul, a missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. His cage wasn't to protect the world from a monster, it was to protect his family from a boy's guilt. A chilling realization dawned on her, connecting Valerius's lies with this new, heartbreaking truth. The curse, she began, her voice dropping, the stutter fading as a cold certainty took its place. It isn't broken by rejection. It's broken by acceptance. Lyra looked up, a flicker of something. Was it hope? In her ancient, tired eyes. Valerius's plan was never just to exile him, it was to lock that power away forever, so that he could one day take it for himself. Then we have to fight, Cora stated. It wasn't a question. Then you must lead, Lyra corrected her, making a choice. And I will show you who to trust. Chapter 20. A Voice of Embers. Their rebellion started in the shadows. Following Lyra's counsel, Cora did not seek out the pack's warriors or the other elders. She went to the fringes, the forgotten, the disillusioned. She found them in the lower dens, on the late-night patrols, in the quiet corners of the territory where their complaints were shared in bitter whispers. They were the young hunters tired of Damien's brutish incompetence, the Omegas who were treated as less than nothing, the families of those who had been injured in the attack Valerius had orchestrated. Her first attempt was a disaster. She approached a group of hunters mending their gear, and the words tangled in her throat, her old anxieties rising up to choke her. They looked away, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. The old shame threatened to swallow her. She wanted to run, to hide, to become the invisible mouse again. But then she pictured Kael, alone in that cold, dark cell, his golden eyes empty. She thought of his patience, of the way he had waited for her words. She straightened her shoulders and tried again, seeking out a different group near the training grounds. This time she did not fight the stutter, she owned it. V. Valerius and D. Damien. They to tell you Kael is a D. danger, she began, her voice shaking but carrying across the quiet clearing. A few wolves turned to look, their expressions wary. They are the D. danger. Who stood and fought when the R rogues attacked? Who protected you? She took a step forward, her gaze sweeping over them, meeting their eyes. Kael did. He fought for this pack, for you, and they betrayed him. They lied to you. They call his sacrifice a curse, and they call their own cowardice leadership. Her words were broken, the rhythm uneven, but they were raw and fiercely, undeniably true. For the first time, her stutter was not a mark of weakness. It was a sign of her struggle, a testament to the sheer force of will it took for her to speak. It made every word feel earned, more honest. An old wolf whose son had been badly wounded in the battle stepped forward, his face grim. The girl is right. My boy saw it. Damien hid behind the elders while the prince bled for us. A young she-wolf, one who had often been the target of Alara's cruelty, nodded in agreement. He saved her, from Alara, from the rogue. He protects the weak. Damien only protects himself. A murmur of assent rippled through the small crowd. It was not an army. It was a handful of outcasts, a flicker of rebellion in the dark. But it was a start. As they were talking, Lyra appeared from the shadows, her face a mask of grim urgency. Valerius is moving faster than I predicted, she said, her voice low. There is a lunar eclipse in 2 nights. It is a time of immense power when the veil between worlds is thin. He plans to use an ancient, forbidden ritual to strip Kael of his alpha bloodline. The ritual will kill him, and Valerius will absorb his power, making him unstoppable. The hopeful spark from their small victory was instantly chilled by a cold dread. The timeline had just shrunk from weeks to days. They had 2 nights to stop a coronation that would be sealed with Kael's death. Chapter 21. Race Against the Dying Moon. The Chamber of Echoes was a place of legend, a sacred cavern deep beneath the Great Hall where the pack's oldest rituals were performed. It was there that Valerius would murder Kael and steal his birthright. Lyra knew of a secret way in, a network of forgotten tunnels used by the first alphas. The plan was a desperate, suicidal long shot: infiltrate the most heavily guarded place in the territory and stop the ritual before the eclipse reached its peak. Cora led her small, unlikely rebellion into the suffocating darkness beneath the earth. There was Lyra, too old to fight, but wise in the pack's secrets. The old hunter, Ganon, his face a grim map of old scars, and 2 young warriors, Reese and Lena, who had been loyal to the old alpha. The tunnels were claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and the sound of their own ragged breaths. They navigated by the faint glow of a moss Lyra had provided, their path fraught with peril. A loose rock triggered a small cave-in, nearly trapping them. Later, they had to creep past a junction where they could hear the guttural voices of Damien's guards on patrol in a main corridor. Every step was a gamble. Finally, they reached the last obstacle. A deep, black chasm sliced through the tunnel, spanned only by a single narrow bridge of crumbling rock. On the other side, silhouetted against a faint light filtering from the chamber beyond, stood two of Valerius's personal guards. They were trapped. Panic began to set in among the small group. Gannon shook his head. "We can't fight them on that bridge. It's a death trap." But Cora remembered Kael's lesson in the sunlit clearing. Power is not just strength. It is control. Control of your breath. She looked at the narrow span, at the dark abyss below. She was the smallest, the quietest. "Distract them," she whispered to Gannon. "I'll cross." Before they could argue, she took a deep, steadying breath, the way Kael had taught her. She stepped onto the bridge. She didn't look down. She focused only on the other side, placing one foot carefully in front of the other. Gannon and the others began making sounds further back in the tunnel, drawing the guards' attention. Cora moved like a phantom, her small frame a whisper in the gloom. She was no longer the clumsy, terrified girl. She was a predator. She reached the other side. With a speed she didn't know she possessed, she swept a loose rock from the ground and brought it down hard on the back of one guard's head. He crumpled without a sound. The second guard turned, his eyes wide with shock, but Rhys and Gannon used the distraction to charge across the bridge. The fight was over in seconds. They were there. A heavy stone door carved with ancient runes stood before them. Through a thin crack, they could see inside. The ritual had already begun. Kael was chained to a massive stone altar, his body limp, his face pale and unconscious. Valerius stood over him, chanting in a guttural ancient tongue. A beam of moonlight, already turning a sickly, blood red, shone down from a hole in the cavern's ceiling, illuminating them. They were almost out of time. Cora looked at her allies, her heart pounding a fierce, determined rhythm. It was now or never. She took one last, deep breath, pulling all her love, all her rage, all her pain into her lungs. Then she opened her mouth, and with a voice that was suddenly, miraculously clear and powerful, a voice free of every chain that had ever bound it, she screamed his name. "Kael!" The sound echoed through the chamber, a thunderclap of pure, unwavering defiance. Chapter 22. The Unbroken Word. "Kael!" Cora's voice, clear and sharp as a striking bell, sliced through the guttural chanting of the ritual. It was a sound of pure defiance, a human sound in a place of dark, ancient magic. The echo of his name, spoken with such strength, was a physical blow to the spell. Valerius spun around, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. The blood-red light of the eclipse faltered for a moment. "Impossible!" he snarled, seeing Cora and her small band of rebels storming the chamber. The Omega. Damien's guards, momentarily stunned, recovered and moved to intercept them. The final, desperate battle began in the cavern's swirling shadows. But Cora's focus was singular. While Gannon and the others met the guards with a clash of claws and fury, she walked toward the altar. Her steps did not falter. The air crackled with dark energy, but she pushed through it, her eyes locked on Kael's still, pale form. This was the dark heart of her quest, the reason for her newfound strength. "You will not touch him," Valerius commanded, raising a hand. A bolt of sickly green energy shot toward her. She flinched but did not stop, and Rhys, one of the young warriors, leaped in front of her, taking the blow on his shoulder with a pained grunt. She reached the edge of the stone altar. Kael was so close, yet so far away, lost in the ritual's cursed slumber. She had to bring him back. She took a deep breath, preparing to fight with the only weapon she had ever truly owned. "He is not yours," she said, the stutter returning for a fleeting moment, a ghost of the broken girl she used to be. It was a reminder of her journey, of the fear she had to conquer. She pushed past it, her voice rising with a power she didn't know she possessed. "He is my mate," she declared, the words ringing with absolute truth. She placed her hand on Kael's chest, directly over his silent heart, a current of pure warmth flowing from her palm. "I claim him. I accept him. All of him. The silence, the sacrifice, the power. I accept it all." Her declaration, a vow of pure, unconditional acceptance in the face of death and dark magic, was the key. A blinding, brilliant explosion of golden light erupted from Kael's body. It was the light of a sunrise, of a supernova, a pure and untainted power that blasted the sickly red gloom from the chamber. The ancient, corrupted runes on the altar cracked and split apart. The shadowy chain of the curse that had been wrapped around his soul for a lifetime shattered into a million motes of dust. Kael's eyes snapped open. They were blazing with the unbound, primal energy of a true Lycan alpha. He sat up, and the heavy chains that bound him to the altar didn't just break. They melted away like wax in a fire. He looked first at Valerius, and the look in his eyes was not of a victim, but of a king who had come to reclaim his throne. Then, his gaze found Cora. The inferno in his eyes softened, replaced by a look of love so profound, so absolute it made her soul sing. Enraged at his failure, Valerius let out a final, desperate roar and lunged, not at Kael, but at her. Kael moved in a blur of impossible speed. He caught the larger Lycan by the throat, lifting him effortlessly from the ground. He opened his mouth, and his voice, finally, wonderfully free, boomed through the chamber. It was a sound of pure, untainted command, of mountains and thunder and ancient storms. He looked at Cora, a vow and a promise in his eyes. "You are mine." Then, turning his deadly attention back to the sputtering villain in his grasp, he finished, "And you will never touch her again." Chapter 23. The Dawn of an Alpha. The final confrontation was not a battle, it was a judgment. Holding Valerius in his grip, Kael was no longer just a prince. He was a force of nature, his unbound alpha power a radiant golden aura around him. Valerius struggled, his stolen magic sputtering and dying in the face of Kael's true birthright. With a final word of command, Kael stripped the usurper of his power, leaving him a broken, whimpering wolf, his silver hair seeming to turn gray and dull. The fight was over. Meanwhile, Cora's small band of rebels, inspired by her impossible courage, had swiftly and efficiently subdued Damien's guards. The Alpha himself, seeing his powerful ally defeated, had tried to crawl away into the shadows. Ganon, the old hunter, dragged him back into the light by the scruff of his neck, throwing him down at Kael's feet. "I was tricked," Damien whined, prostrating himself. "Valerius forced my hand. I was only trying to protect the pack." The coward's lies filled the cavern, echoing the same false words that had condemned them. But Cora would not let them stand. She stepped forward, her position at Kael's side feeling as natural as breathing. Her voice, no longer a weapon of magic but an instrument of truth, cut through the silence. She spoke to the pack members who had gathered fearfully at the chamber's entrance, their faces pale in the aftermath of the battle. She told them everything. She spoke of Damien's cowardice during the rogue attack, of his secret pact with Valerius, of the betrayal that had nearly cost them all their lives. Her words were not broken. They were not hesitant. They were clear, steady, and irrefutable, each one landing with the weight of absolute truth. She did not need to shout. She just needed to speak. The pack wolves looked from their groveling, pathetic alpha to the magnificent Lycan Prince standing tall and proud. They saw the brave Omega beside him, the girl they had mocked, now standing as their savior. They saw the truth in her eyes, in her unwavering voice. They saw the power in Kael not as a curse to be feared, but as a shield to protect them. It was Ganon, the old hunter, who moved first. He went down on one knee, his head bowed low, not in fear, in fealty. Then Rhys and Lena knelt beside him. One by one, couple by couple, the other wolves followed suit. A wave of silent, reverent submission spread through the cavern. They were kneeling before their true alphas. The war was over. The lies were broken. A new day was dawning for the Silver Moon Pack. Kael looked at the sea of bowing heads, then his gaze returned to Cora, the anchor of his soul, the woman who had walked into the darkest pit of despair to pull him out. He took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth and promise through her. He lifted her knuckles to his lips, his golden eyes speaking a lifetime of gratitude. The pack was theirs. Their future was theirs. Now, finally, they could simply be theirs. Chapter 24. A Voice and a Vow. The cabin was a haven, the fire in the hearth a warm, gentle heartbeat in the quiet of the night. The pack was beginning to heal. Valerius and Damien were imprisoned, awaiting the justice of the combined Lycan councils. For the first time since he had arrived, there were no threats, no schemes, no curses. There was only the peaceful scent of pine and the two of them, finally, truly alone. Kael turned from the fire, and in the soft, flickering light, Cora saw an expression she had never seen on his face before. A gentle, wondrous uncertainty. For his entire life, his voice had been a weapon he had to cage. Now, it was a gift he was still learning how to wield. "Cora," he said, his voice a low, beautiful rumble. He spoke her name not as a single, desperate word, but as if he were savoring the simple, miraculous freedom of it. He sat beside her on the fur rug before the fire, taking her hands in his. And then he began to speak. He told her everything. He gave voice to the words he had written in his letters, imbuing them with a depth of emotion that paper could never hold. He told her of the first time he had seen her, a quiet, sad girl who tried so hard to be invisible, and how her hidden strength had called to him long before the mate bond had ever sparked. He spoke of his loneliness, of the crushing weight of his silent vow. He laid his entire soul bare for her, his voice the key that unlocked it all. She listened, her heart swelling with a love so vast it almost hurt. When he finally fell silent, his story told, she responded not just with words, but with a touch that spoke its own language. She reached up, her fingers gently tracing the strong line of his jaw, the column of his throat where so much pain had been held for so long. "They laughed at me for stuttering," she whispered, the memory now a distant echo holding no power over her. "But your silence taught me how to listen. And my voice—" She smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "My voice was always meant to find yours." In his eyes, she saw the answer to the question that had haunted both their lives. Their worth had never been defined by their flaws. It had been forged by them. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "My mate," he breathed, the words a sacred vow. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed. Their final coming together was not a desperate claiming or a battle for dominance. It was a slow, tender worship, a passionate, perfect union of two souls who had been broken in just the right places to fit together perfectly. It was a promise spoken in murmurs and sealed with a touch, a true and final mating of equals. Later, tangled in the furs, the firelight dancing over their skin, a perfect peace settled over them. Her voice was her strength now, a tool of truth and leadership. His silence was, at long last, a choice. He could speak, and his voice would guide their pack. But in the quiet moments, in the space between heartbeats, they would always have the perfect, understanding silence they had shared from the very beginning. She, the girl mocked for her broken voice, had saved them all with her words. And he, the prince trapped by a curse, had found his true power not by speaking, but by finally being heard. They were home,